Imagine tuning into the NHL's Fan-less 2020 bubble and barely noticing the Florida Panthers, a franchise so deeply camouflaged by mediocrity that even silence felt like their natural soundtrack. Now flash forward 5 short springs and picture that same club swaggering into its 3rd consecutive Stanley Cup Final with the kind of menace teams usually spend decades trying and mostly failing to generate. The transformation is staggering. From half-forgotten sidebar in a football state to the league's undisputed apex predator, Florida has become living proof that equal parts vision, audacity, and sheer obstinacy can convert irrelevance into the nucleus of a dynasty. Before we dive into the blow-by-blow of how owner Vinny Viola's Sunbelt experiment rewrote the modern contender blueprint, a quick favor: these long-form breakdowns take mountains of research, late-night stat digs, and more caffeine than a cross-country road trip, so smash subscribe if you want every future deep dive delivered the moment it drops. All set. Good. Let's rewind to the day the ground shifted beneath South Florida hockey. On September 2nd, 2020, the Panthers hired ex-player agent and Blue Jackets exec Bill Zito, handing him a talented but identity-free roster built around Alexander Barkov, Jonathan Huberdeau, and Aaron Ekblad. In his first presser, Zito dismissed regular season glory as dress rehearsal, vowing to build a club that could trade punches in May and June. A veteran negotiator unafraid of risk, he immediately rang analytics staffs across the league, hunting undervalued players with skating legs, bite, and that elusive playoff switch. Within a week, the front office's mandate had flipped from incremental tweaks to controlled volatility aimed squarely at springtime survival. Zito's opening salvo barely rippled across transaction tickers, yet forged the backbone of a new beast. First, he scooped up Gustav Forsling off waivers after Chicago cut bait, trusting internal data that pegged the Swedes' closing speed and first pass accuracy as top pair material. Days later, he nabbed puck-moving Brandon Montour from Buffalo for a 3rd-round pick, betting the defenseman's ugly numbers were a product of Sabres' chaos, not declining talent. The coup de grace was prying Sam Bennett from Calgary for a 2nd-rounder and a prospect, importing playoff scars and a controlled snarl that shattered Florida's country club vibe. Mobility, transition zip, and edge arrived overnight, shaving seconds off defensive zone exits and giving the Panthers their first real bite since the rat trick era. They roared to a 37-14-5 pandemic record, but Tampa's first-round gut check reminded everyone that raw grit still needed refinement before it could translate into series wins. That offseason, Zito fired another cannon, sending a 1st-round pick and World Juniors goalie phenom Devin Levi to Buffalo for top 6 catalyst Sam Reinhart, then locking up Brandon Montour and Carter Verhaeghe. The 2021-22 Panthers erupted. 4 relentless lines, 58 wins, and the franchise's first President's Trophy. Jonathan Huberdeau piled up 115 points. Alexander Barkov owned Selke Chatter, and Sunrise finally buzzed like a true hockey market. Playoff reality hit in round 2. Tampa's suffocating structure limited Florida to just 3 goals across a 4-game sweep, with Andrei Vasilevsky barely breaking a sweat. The humiliation doubled as diagnosis. Regular season fireworks meant nothing without the trench war discipline required when every inch of ice is traded for bruises. Zito treated the 2022 offseason like triage. He cut loose Jack Adams finalist Andrew Brunette and installed veteran Paul Maurice, betting on the coach's trademark structure and no-nonsense accountability. Days later, he stunned the league, sending Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, prospect Cole Schwint, and a 1st-rounder to Calgary for Matthew Tkachuk, then locking the 24-year-old force of nature to an 8-year, $76 million deal, trading a 115-point star and a top-pair defender for Tkachuk's mix of elite hands and playoff nastiness was high risk, high reward, but it electrified the room overnight. Practices turned chippy, road swings became measuring sticks, and Morris, half grinning behind the bench, said the new vibe was chemistry you can smell. The first Maurice Tkachuk campaign was a roller coaster that rattled seatbelts. Injuries, growing pains, and a mid-season scoring slump pinned Florida to the East's final wildcard slot on season's last weekend. Their reward, a 1st-round date with the Boston Bruins juggernaut, fresh off setting NHL records for wins and points. Down 3-1 in the series, the Panthers looked ready for summer golf until Tkachuk famously told teammates, "Pack a light bag, we're coming back for Game 7. Florida stole an OT win in Game 5, detonated Boston in Game 6, and clawed out an epic overtime victory in Game 7 after Verhaeghe tied things with 59 seconds left. confidence became jet fuel. They toppled Toronto in 5 and then Carolina in a 4-game crucible that set a conference final record for combined overtime minutes. Florida bowed out to Vegas in the Cup Final, wounded but awakened. They had proven their template lethal in the crucible that matters, and the rest of the league had noticed. With the humiliation of 2022 and the near miss of 2023 branded into their collective memory, the Panthers opened 2023-24 like a team that understood window physics. Maurice tightened their neutral zone forecheck into an accordion that suffocated possession entries, while Sergei Bobrovsky rolled back the clock to Columbus' 2019 form, stitching together a .916 save percentage and a league-best goals saved above expected mark for most of the year. Sam Reinhart reaped the transitional chaos, exploding for 57 goals. Barkov eclipsed Olli Jokinen's franchise point record while vacuuming up his second Selke. Come spring, Florida barrel-rolled Tampa in 4, surgically out-adjusted Boston in 6, and overpowered the Rangers in a heavyweight 6-gamer that felt like a time-lapse of the sport's evolution. Raw speed meeting trench warfare. In the final, they built a 3-0 series lead against Edmonton, watched Connor McDavid orchestrate a freakish rally to 3-3, and then slammed the door in Sunrise's first-ever Game 7, with Bobrovsky repelling 42 shots, and Tkachuk scoring the go-ahead on a greasy net front scramble. The Stanley Cup was paraded down Las Olas Boulevard to crowds that once barely remembered the Panthers existed. The morning after the parade, Bill Zito was already back on the phone. Rumors swirled that Florida might stand pat, but patience is not his brand. At the deadline, he stunned pundits by landing Brad Marchand, a deal built on Boston's sudden pivot toward youth. Many worried about chemistry. Inside the room, Barkov and Tkachuk welcomed a like-minded troll who also happened to own one of the league's sharpest hockey IQs. Marchand fit seamlessly on a second line that shredded matchups, posting 20 points in 23 playoff games and disorienting defenders with veteran sleight of hand. Playoff path, Tampa dispatched in 5. Toronto survived a 7-game emotional earthquake before bowing. Carolina manhandled in 5. The final, a rematch with Edmonton, drew headlines about revenge scripts, yet the Panthers authored a different story, closing the Oilers in 6 with a 5-1 Game 6 masterclass. Sam Bennett, once considered a second-line consolation prize, scored 15 postseason goals and skated off with the Conn Smythe, while Maurice, after 1,800 NHL games behind the bench, now possessed not 1 but 2 rings. Sunrise had become Titletown South, the first true cap-era back-to-back champion, and a club many insiders felt wasn't anywhere close to tapping out. Florida's rise didn't hinge on a single lottery pick or a generational goaltender landing in their laps. It was chiseled year by year through a string of fearless choices anchored by one unshakable principle: every decision must serve playoff survivability. Bill Zito hired a coach who could demand accountability after 60-minute fireworks had failed. He traded fan-favorite stars for an agitator visionary enough to sign long-term in South Florida. He kept adjusting on the margins. Forsling here, Montour there. Marchand when the shelf screamed now or never. The result is a team whose top scorers hit, whose bottom 6 scores timely goals, and whose collective psyche treats the 82-game calendar as compulsory training for the real examination each spring. The Panthers have compressed the typical decade-long contender arc into half the time, stacking 3 final appearances and 2 cups in a window that remains propped wide by long contracts to Barkov, Tkachuk, Reinhart, Ekblad, and Bobrovsky. The question no longer centers on whether Florida can stay on top, but rather how many champagne-soaked Junets they can squeeze out of a blueprint that has, so far, outthought and outfought the entire league. Stick around. High-definition highlights from that clinching Game 6 are rolling next, and if you crave the next chapter in hockey's evolving empires, hit subscribe right now so you never miss a stride.